Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. This webinar is called Crafting Your Career Story. It's one of our experts and insights hosted by Devant. Just wanted to let you know that for this session, it is a webinar mode, so all participants have been muted. We have over 200 students that are joining us today for this amazing discussion and fireside chat with one of our experts that I'm going to introduce shortly. So there's no need to use your video. You should be able to hear via your device. The session will also be recorded so you can have reference of the session later on. So please make a note in the chat if you're having any technical difficulty, and I'll try to assist you along the way. If you've got questions, this is going to be an interactive session. We've got lots of questions for our guest, but we want to get your questions asked first. So please put your questions in the Q&A, and we will respond to your questions throughout the discussion today. Also, for your reference, you can find more information about our upcoming events, our career content, and support services for you on our website at www.devant.ca and all of our future workshops. So a little bit about us. This webinar is hosted by Devant, and we are a subsidiary of Academica Group. Academica Group has been around for over 20 years, providing higher education strategic advice to universities and colleges in Canada, including labor market information, as well as strategic enrollment analysis. And Devant is a subsidiary, and we specifically focus on international students, offering a career development platform to universities and colleges to help international students work, stay, and succeed in Canada. In addition to events, we have for you one-on-one coaching, we have free services, and our events are held every Wednesday for the entire year. So we are here to support you and help you succeed in your career search and your career journey in Canada. So a little bit about me. My name is Sisha Maharaj, and I work with Devant as a senior consultant, specifically helping our career centers to use technology and innovation to scale up career outcomes for their international students and newcomer youth. And I'm also head of business development and employer relations for KPMG Technologies, and that is an accessible multilingual mobile app to help newcomers to Canada get jobs. And I've had over 25 years of experience in campus recruitment and career education. So my passion is helping newcomers and international students get quality jobs in Canada. So excited to be here with you tonight. We're also joined by Babatunde. And Babatunde, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Babatunde Ajiwoke. I'm a student of Cheba Institute, Montreal, Department of E-Commerce and Business Management. I've got background skills in customer service and sales, digital marketing, and social media management. And today I will be co-moderating this session with Sisha, and I hope you have a lovely event this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Babatunde. And Babatunde is going to keep us on track from an international student perspective and welcome your feedback and questions as well today. So without further ado, I am so excited to host this session with an amazing expert, colleague, professional, and just an amazing person, Adam Rodricks, National Director, Social Growth and Experience at KPMG. Adam is an international award-winning social media strategist and speaker who has transformed the word of mouth into the world of mouth for Fortune 500 companies. In his first book, Trigger Fingers, which I've got right here, he talks to us about personal branding through storytelling, and it's skyrocketed to the top of the charts, becoming the #1 bestseller in Canada in the categories of direct marketing, public relations, and business. Adam released his first TED Talk, How to Build Trust Online, in 2023, and it became an overnight success, amassing 100,000 views in the first 29 days of his talk becoming available. Adam has spent over 15 years growing the social and digital properties of Canada's most prominent brands, managing all aspects of their digital marketing strategy and innovation. He is currently the National Director of Social Growth and Experience at KPMG Canada. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining us today. And I'm going to pass it.
Thank you.
I also noticed that you were doing some stand-up comedy, and I so admire that. I was just in awe of your ability and your talents, and really looking forward to tonight's conversation.
Sounds good. Yeah, that was me going outside of my comfort zone and trying something new. So I think me and the students, we have something in common there.
I love that. So I'm going to pass it over to Babatunde to get us started off with some of the questions, Adam.
Sounds
Hi,
good.
Adam.
Hi.
Okay, so the first question for today, can you please share with us why personal storytelling is such a powerful tool, both personally and professionally?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, great question. I think for me, it's always transcended being one of just personal or professional. In fact, in that book that I wrote, I start off like the very first chapter is about me as a little boy who I fondly remember as being a very unreliable narrator, somebody who really used storytelling to get what he wanted, both in school from his classmates and his teachers, and at home from his parents. And I think that that whole chapter is meant to entice everybody and show you exactly why storytelling can be so powerful, right? When
Yeah.
storytelling is done right, it can be persuasive, right? It can be inspiring, it can be relatable, it can evoke emotions. And I think above all, I use storytelling to create something that is memorable. So I can tell you a fact, I can tell you something about myself, information, or I can certainly use my favorite vehicle for
Mhm.
remembering information, and that is to use a story.
Wow. Thank you for the answer. Thank you. Nice.
Thanks, Adam. And maybe I can maybe ask you to elaborate a little bit. I know, how did you become so passionate about storytelling? And, maybe you can share with us a little bit more, about your career path and how you ended up in this role and sort of this area of expertise.
Yeah, so professionally, we think about working in marketing and communications. Of course, you have a love of words in all forms. But personally, I was always a kid to pick up a fiction book. So I was entranced by a lot of, storytelling books when I was younger. And I think at the back of my mind, I always thought I'd try my hand at writing something, but I didn't really know what. So when you hit that cross section of where your aptitude meets your passion, I think that's where some really beautiful work happens. And for me, that was certainly the case.
Thank you. And I noticed, when you post things, and even when I met you, I've had the privilege of meeting Adam at a couple different events and in person. One of the things that stood out to me is just that you're really honest when you're posting about yourself or about topics that are important to you. So can you tell us, like, what role does vulnerability play in effective personal storytelling? And how can individuals navigate the balance between authenticity and oversharing?
Yeah, Sisha, thank you. That's very kind words. And I think there's a popular misconception because I hear it from people in a lot of different ways. They'll say, it's amazing that you can just sit down and be vulnerable. It's amazing that you can just open up like that. And whether it's for myself or the influencers I've worked with, I would say that it's probably a misconception because what we're doing is, we don't just sit down, write it, got it, good, put it out there. It's amazing. For many of us, the process, it's iterative. So I don't just sit there, come up with something vulnerable, and then post it for the world to see. I'm building it over time. And the benefit of building something as small as a post over time is that I'm honing that message. I'm thinking about, that line between authenticity and oversharing. For me, that's always big. I don't mind being vulnerable, but to what end, right? Am I going to evoke a feeling in my reader or in my listener, or am I just sharing something because I feel like I want to share it? So it helps me to, when I take that frame of reference, and I think this is good for interviews too, it helps me to keep my audience top of mind, who they are, why they're reading, why they're watching, listening, whatever it is, and what do they need from this. Really, really critical things to think about. And then constantly refining. I think this is a really big part of whether writing is part of your aspiration, you ever want to do something with the written or the spoken word. It's just constantly refining and also reflecting on my intentions with the story. So I'm not giving too much, and it's governed by a quote I'm sure many people have heard before, but this is a quote that when I heard it certainly changed my life. It was by Mark Twain, who said, "I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one instead." And that's always stayed with me because brevity is such a skill and one that you should definitely use if you're job seeking.
Thank you. Thank you,
Wow,
Adam.
thank you. Okay, so Adam, in what ways can personal storytelling be used to build connections and rapports? In what ways can
Yeah.
personal storytelling be used to build connections and rapport?
Yeah, Babatunde, like really good question. I think what I found is that When you're sharing your personal experiences, it gives you an opportunity to create an emotional connection with someone. That's why we tell personal stories as opposed to stories that we heard in the news, right? That's
Yeah.
the opportunity there. Maybe in some cases, especially again, I go back to job seeking, the opportunity there, the person that you have the chance to impact may not even have any type of prior relationship with you at all. So a pretty coveted one there. And this was pretty evident for me. Like I was lucky enough to go on a cross Canada book tour, which was like a wild experience for me because it showed me this lesson that we're talking about. Like it's just so polarizing because what would happen is I would meet people and they would just like pour their hearts out to me, right? They would pour their hearts out and they would tell me these intimate things because they feel like they know me, right? Because they've read 18 of my most intimate stories about who I was, how I was brought up, love, life, laughter, failure, you name it. But on the flip side, if you think about that from my perspective, I don't know you, right? I've never been privy to learning about you. So it talks a little bit about how successfully one can create an emotional connection on their side. And on my side, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I could just, get to this level with them too. So, finding that common ground, I think that's really what it is. Find that common ground, or better yet, use the storytelling to build trust. And it can be a pretty powerful networking tool for you as well.
Wow, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you talked about building trust, Adam, and a lot of our international students who are new to Canada are trying to build that common connection when they don't know the other individual, or they're going to an event and they don't know anyone. So I guess what we're looking for is some guidance from you, Adam. What strategies can candidates use to make their stories memorable and stand out, among other candidates, but during a networking event? So if you take us back to you meeting someone at a book signing, or I know you've been to many on-campus events, do you have any advice for students that are just trying to meet individuals at a networking event and, just trying to be memorable and standing out in a crowd of other students?
I do. And, I think my advice, I can break it down in terms of actionable tips to storytelling, but I'll preface it first with, I sit on a program advisory council for one of the major colleges in the city. I teach my own college course. I have a lot of international students myself. And if there's one thing many of them tell me that they get a bit apprehensive about, or there's a bit of shock when they get here, it's the emphasis that we put in the Western world on networking. And it is a heavy emphasis. A lot of them ask me questions like, this couldn't actually do anything, though, right? Like, it's good people to know, but this is never going to get me a job, right? And to that, I say, do not underestimate the power of networking. So start, if you are just starting out and you want to practice on maybe some of your peers, 3 tips that I have for better storytelling, at least. Number one, and I don't see a lot of students do this, start with a hook. Okay, so you want to always begin your story with a compelling hook or an opener that just grabs attention and then draws people in. It could be as simple as a captivating anecdote or a thought-provoking question, or even just like a really vivid description that sets the scene. But don't take forever to get into something. You don't want to lose that precious little attention someone gives you, especially on a first meet. Number 2, establish context. I can't tell you how many anecdotes or stories or just meetings I've had with people that have fallen flat because they didn't give me context as to why we were talking, setting the scene, introducing the people that they're talking about, or they just assume that a public figure that was second nature to them, where they came from, would be second nature to me, and there was a disconnect there. So help your listeners when you're networking, help them to understand the background or the circumstances leading up to the events of your story. That's number 2. And then the final thing, if I had to say one, we already talked about the importance of emotion and vulnerability. So I'm going to just focus on something that I think everyone, myself included, can work on, and that is keeping our stories concise. There have been some times where there have been some painfully long interactions with people, and I don't say that. I hope you don't, misconstrue that as me saying that I don't want to be there. But when there's a room full of, if we were in person right now, 30 plus of us, and I'm trying to talk to each and every one of you, make a memorable connection, that could preclude me from doing so if you were overly verbose. So, keeping it concise, keeping it focused on your main narrative. What do I want to remember out of this interaction? And avoid unnecessary details and tangents. You do that by practicing. So practice your networking, and then go out there and do some of it with your industry peers before you start getting in front of hiring managers and recruiters.
Wow.
Yeah, Babatunde, have you seen that happen, or how does that resonate with you in terms of the 3 tips?
The three tips resonates with me because I have tried the three tips, especially on LinkedIn, and it has worked for me.
Good.
Yeah, it has really worked for me. Great tips
That's
anyways. Thanks. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And I think that, some of the feedback we've been getting from recruiters is exactly that, Adam, is that, sometimes students tend to ramble a little bit and then the recruiter gets lost in the story.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think that, this is really great advice, is sort of practicing your story and trying to be more concise. And so having the hook, thinking about the context
Yeah.
is really, really important.
Mhm.
Really, really important advice. Thank you so much. So
Yeah,
you
for
talked
sure.
about hiring managers a little bit.
Hmm.
So let's dig into a little bit. I'm going to go a little bit more into number two there, Babatunde. In
Okay.
terms of, how can we use storytelling effectively to address gaps or weaknesses, in a candidate's resume or work history? Have you seen any individuals do that really well in terms of using storytelling to address any gaps or any challenges that might be in their resume or their work
100%.
history?
100%. I think absolutely. I was once in an interview where there was an applicant who had to explain a year gap on their resume. And I'll
Mhm.
never forget this person. Well, partially because they were hired, but I'll never forget this person because of how effectively they used what we're talking about. So this person used that year gap, which for most people would be construed as a weakness, right? Something that you
Mhm.
are maybe hoping doesn't come up, or if it does come up, that it's just glossed over. This
Mhm.
person used that as an opportunity to tell me a really short story about how their passion made them switch to industries, and then they had become just an absolute deadly coder for websites. They talked about the
Oh,
coding
wow.
languages that they had learned, yeah, how many hours a day that they worked on during this gap year, and then they just rattled off this plethora of like certifications and designations that they had, done while they were away. So it was a fantastic way to frame that perceived weakness as a strength, and they use storytelling because coding was actually very central to the job that we were interviewing for at that time. So let me tell you a story about my passion, and boom, all of a sudden we've reframed a weakness as a strength. You can do it too. I think it's a lot of just thinking about those common interview questions that we get and practicing, what are the 3 or 4 notes that I absolutely need to hit, and then can I do it in 2 to 3 questions? That's, I think, really, really important.
Thank you. Well, I think that you've answered number two, all of all of I had on the list here. So I'm going to pass it back to Babatunde. Thank you so much, Adam, for that feedback on interviewing with hiring managers.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so how can storytelling be used to convey not only what a candidate has accomplished, but also their potentials and aspirations for the future within a particular role or organization?
Yeah,
How
that's a
can
really good
storytelling be
question.
used to convey not only what a candidate has accomplished, but
Yeah.
also their potential and aspirations for the future within a particular role or organization?
Yeah, so I think if you want to take this from just, retroactive and what you've done in the past to what you
Mm-hmm.
are doing or will do in the future, you
Yeah.
can demonstrate your ability to learn really quickly. I love when people do that. I love when they take the time to talk about their growth
Mm,
over time.
okay.
So I think ultimately when we look at it, there is a bit of a matching exercise that interviewers are trying to do. We've got the role, right? We've got the posting, and then we've got the candidate in front of us, and we're trying to see if this is a good fit.
Mm-hmm.
And I preface this with I don't speak on behalf of anybody but myself, but I call it a glorified matching exercise because that helped me to really hone in on what I was trying to focus on with my communication. So when I do
Okay.
that, it enables me to paint the picture so that the interviewer can see me being successful adapting to a new environment, just being really crystal clear about my growth, as I said, how I learn really quickly. I don't have to necessarily talk about everything that I've done in the past. I can draw on some of my traits that will make me successful in the future too.
Wow, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Adam, in terms of storytelling for interviews, are there any specific stories or narrative structures that tend to resonate well with hiring managers or in the interviews that you've seen?
Yeah. Again, I think like it's all about your audience. You think about a first level, maybe meeting with HR versus if you're getting to a latter stage, and you're meeting the hiring manager who's a subject matter expert, the stories that you may tell would be different, right? Because those people have very different backgrounds. They may be interviewing you for very different skill sets, right? They may be looking at different parts of your candidacy entirely. So playing your audience, I think, is a really, really important thing that a lot of people gloss over, and they'll just prepare for all interviews the same way and they'll speak to someone. I think there are so many nuances about the person across from you. I've interviewed with a parent before who told me, like, I had a really rough night. And in this instance, we took things a little bit slower, but we still accomplished everything that we would. Normally, as you can probably tell from my excitement, I'm very boom, boom, high energy. But that person took it upon me to be transparent about, I'm kind of down here in terms of my energy right now. And some people hear it and they go, oh, I'd be mortified to share that in an interview. That doesn't put me as a candidate in their best light. But actually what they did, and again, I think everybody has this opportunity, they spun it. They talked about how being a parent can prepare you for any job. And that's a really powerful anecdote for anybody who has kids or has maybe even, watched kids grow up. So that's a really, really important one. Another thing that I'll say is in terms of specific types of stories, I've heard people draw on the STAR method, and I'm not sure if anyone else knows this, but the STAR method is basically S is for situation, T is for task, A is for action, and then finally the all important result. So when you frame stories using the STAR method, so situation, task, action, and result, what you're finding is that you're giving the interviewer all the sweet spots with very little of the filler. And regardless of their background, again, there could be someone who sits in HR as a recruiter, they could be someone who sits in the business as a subject matter expert. They will probably have an understanding of, when you use that format, what you bring to the table.
Very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Babatunde.
Okay, so final tips or tactics that everyone should try after leaving this discussion.
Ooh, that's a big one. Final tips and tactics. I would probably say brevity. Again, I'm going to come back to it. I think a lot of people have asked me, how do you prepare for like public speaking, things like that? I'm sorry that there's no magic trick. There's no sexy answer. A lot of it is just good old fashioned hard work and practice. And I think the same is true of really good interviews. So, brevity is the skill that I would say is of the utmost importance when you think about it. Your ability to be concise with your answers, but still hit on the really important pieces, that enables you to get more answers to an interview, right? You cover more ground when you're able to give them what they need and then move on to the next one, as opposed to somebody who tells a 5 to 8 to 10 minute story. And I've had a lot of those too. And it's not that there's anything inherently wrong, if they're asking you to go more in depth on what you did or a scenario based question, perhaps. But I personally think for my international students, the disconnect that I'm seeing is that they're not practicing the communication around the interviewer. They're not practicing necessarily networking as much either, but really when you get shortlisted, your resume has done the hard part, which is getting shortlisted. I think a lot of people just think, oh, I'm going to answer honestly based on who I am, and that should be good enough. Well, you think about just how many people go and get asked that same question. I would implore each and every one of you to work on those skills and prepare good, concise answers for your interviewers as well.
Wow, great response. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Adam, the questions are starting to come in. I'm going to maybe pause at this moment to see if we can answer some questions from our students who are dialing in right now. So I have someone who said, regarding STAR, can you please give us an example of how this can be used for clarification?
Yeah, absolutely. So with STAR is meant to basically give you a template for how you write your answers without filler, right? So the situation, right? Typically what I like to do is I frame stories in interviews not as the role or responsibility, that like the thing that I did, but what I accomplished, right? So the situation was we needed to launch a website. I was in charge of the go-to-market strategy. That's the task, right? My action was to ensure I was studied up. I learned basically everything there was about website health. That was my action. And the result was that we achieved, 350,000 unique monthly users in the first month. So that's a really short way to use the STAR method. It's about framing it not as the roles and responsibilities, which how many people have in common, but the way in which you set yourself apart. The action is one thing, but the way that you essentially accomplish something is entirely different. And so STAR method can help you to frame a short anecdote on what you accomplished as opposed to what you did.
Okay. Thank you. That example was helpful. We have another student here who's an introvert. And they're asking, what advice can you give to some introverts who think that they're not good in storytelling? What can they do to improve their confidence in talking?
Okay, so some of the best storytellers in the world are introverts, and I say that because when I think about my life, they choose their words very carefully. So you only get the need to know information. So being an introvert does not stop you from being a good storyteller. I think it's the lack of practice that is often associated with being an introvert. I don't want to put myself in this networking position because it's going to be uncomfortable. My social battery is going to drain incredibly quickly, and I don't want to do that because that's going to feel uncomfortable. So I want to leave, right? These are the things that I often hear from the introverts that I've coached or that I've taught. And what I would say is, you can be selective. You know yourself, right? So if you're working around a Wednesday night mixer, I would tell myself that, okay, I'm probably going to need time on Thursday to recharge and on Tuesday to prepare. So I think for a lot of introverts, it's the idea of prolonged extroversion or interaction that is just absolutely terrifying to them. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not supposed to practice those skills. We just have to set ourselves up before and after to maybe lean into our comfort a little bit more. I'm as you can probably tell, an extrovert through and through, married to a complete introvert, and I can say for her that was how she really took her job seeking and those networking skills to the next level. She was kind to herself afterwards, but she took the time to prepare before.
Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing that. And,
Thank
I
you.
find, Babatunde, did you have anything you wanted to add or?
Yeah, I just learned something now because I'm also an introvert, and most times I find it difficult to put out my content, even though I have the idea, I have the concept, I have everything, but I feel, oh, there's this kind of strength in me that is limiting me to put out my content out there. So I think I just have to open up and just do what I have to do. So I shouldn't say the fact that I'm an introvert should stop me from putting my content out there and letting people to know what I'm capable of doing. Yeah.
Yeah, Babatunde, if you need to be empowered even more, let me just tell you, one of the things I learned very early on, the hard way in my career, was that nobody is thinking about us nearly as much as we are thinking about ourselves. So if you are one of those introverts who just scrutinizes over every interaction that didn't go perfectly to plan, let me
Mm-hmm.
just tell you that, especially at a networking event where you're meeting tens of people, nobody's thinking back on that one thing that you wish you could have done better, if you maybe misspoke or didn't pick up on a cue or mispronounced
Yeah.
someone's name. So if those are the things that make you cringe, if those are the things that are stopping you from doing more of it, just remember, that you yourself probably don't remember when anybody else missteps, and it's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely the truth for everybody else in reference to you too.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So it looks like this is a popular topic. Babatunde, thank you for sharing, your feelings as well and about sharing content socially.
Mm-hmm.
And because, that's a different element as well. I have another student as is just sharing, speaking more on the introvert question, spontaneous speaking is what makes me nervous.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
So what I try to do, especially when, and this is not just specific to introverts. I will tell you that I, as an extrovert, experience this when I go into a room of incredibly senior leaders. I'm intimidated, right? Or I'm hoping that I don't get exposed as not knowing something that I should. So what I often try to do is take some time, especially if something's posed to the group or you see the conversation potentially going somewhere, take a quick second, plan in your head, how would I start this? And in the absence of everything else, and this is something that has saved me so many times, in the absence of knowing exactly what to say, ask a good question. Ask a good question that will perhaps prompt someone who does know the answer to step in. There are a number of different ways that we can use conversation to our advantage. And there's a misconception that having all of the answers is, a prerequisite for a good conversation. That is so not the case. I come to most interactions, even with my students, expecting to learn as much as I expect to teach. And I think that's a proper mentality to bring to your networking. Be genuinely curious about people. Don't ask
Mm-hmm.
them questions just because you think that's what you're supposed to do. Ask them questions and then actively listen to what they're saying. You'll be amazed how many times the conversation just flows when you're focused on what they're saying as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to waiting for your turn to speak.
Mm.
Mhm. Curiosity. I think that's such an important skill that international students bring to Canada. And we do
Yes.
have a question about this in particular around, how can I address the lack of Canadian experience in my stories?
Yeah, it's a chicken and egg, right? I need the Canadian experience in order to get the job, but to get the job, right, I need like it's just going round and round, and which one comes first. So I say this, and it's specific to my world in digital marketing, but I'm sure it works for a number of other things. One of the reasons I love working in digital is that I never needed to request permission to start working in digital. What I mean by that is I never had to wait for the formal 9 to 5 job offer to start a digital presence, right? My
Mm.
portfolio started the day I started my own blog, my own podcast, my own website. All of that was on, my own time and my initiatives. So that was something that helped me early on. And I think for a lot of people, you can probably see how you could do the same. Now, for each of us, what our portfolio consists of is going to be very different. But think about what you can do to demonstrate your knowledge in the absence of that Canadian experience. For a lot of people, they start by volunteering, right? They start, taking internships, co-ops. I had somebody who once came as a newcomer to Canada. They interviewed for a social media position, and they said, "Listen, I haven't had a social position yet, but here's my Cats account on Instagram that has 185,000 followers. Here is my community church group that didn't have a website, they didn't have any type of presence whatsoever. I built this from scratch." And all of a sudden, you can see using that example how that person didn't require their formal start to begin their career. They used what they had, and that may be specific to digital, but I love the teaching behind it.
Yeah, that's very powerful. I love that. You don't need to have a full-time job to start working in digital marketing.
Mhm.
So that's really, really powerful. I think that is something from a marketing perspective that's different than maybe some other traditional jobs, is that you can practice and try your skills on your own time and show your passion and build up that portfolio.
Yeah, and on the flip side, we've got so many great resources nowadays that you can learn from for free, right? And that it just wasn't the case 10 years ago. So I would say, even for somebody who is looking to establish their Canadian presence, one of the things that you can do is you can earn certifications, designations, things that are recognized here. You'll notice a lot of them are spelled out in plain English on job applications: must be proficient in X or would love experience in Y. Take it upon yourselves to seek those out and see if there are tutorials on YouTube, or in some cases, even from the company themselves, offered for free, because some of these certs, like Google AdWords, if anybody was going to ask, it's just in the best interest of the company to have more people trained on this thing, right? And you do find out that it comes up quite a bit in interviews as well.
Mhm. So we actually have a question around this, Adam, with, someone, I think Savio, thank you, Savio, for your question. Many jobs require industry experience. Just wondering normally how much they would consider overseas experience, not generic ones like business consulting and counseling, but overseas experience maybe in marketing or in digital marketing.
Yeah, it's tough to Savio, it's tough to talk in generalities. What I mean by that is, how can you position your overseas experience with specificity to draw a comparison to what they're looking for here? So if you did the exact same job using the exact same tool, I would make reference to that, make that crystal clear to the person on the other side of the interview that, despite me not doing it here, I know this platform in and out. And I think, again, that's one of the benefits of working in something in the online realm, is that very many times, a lot of times, we're using industry standard software. We're using really big enterprise level tools. So if you have the ability to speak to it that way, I think it can sometimes bridge the gap that some people have with international experience.
Mhm. And are there specific tools like that you would recommend that students learn on their own? Because if they haven't worked in a Canadian company, Adam, or haven't been in a marketing specific role yet, what are some of the specific tools or technology platforms that you recommend or that you think would be good for aspiring marketers, or even those who are coming from overseas but have had marketing experience already?
Yeah. So, for me, working in digital, like analytics is never going to go out of style. So I do come back to those suites like AdWords. If you can show any of the Google certifications, it really does hold weight with me personally, but it depends on what you're going to work in, right? So there are a number of different places that you can go. I've seen people bring things from like BrainStation and Coursera and Skillshare, Masterclass. Basically, they've said, listen, I've learned from people in this particular environment or in this country. So although I don't have the formal experience, here's my portfolio that I prepared. Like here's my masterclass. Here's sort of my my capstone project, if you will. And I think that's great when you're bringing in references as well. I've always found those to be particularly powerful in an interview setting when we are not talking in theoreticals about what you say you can do. We're instead looking at a document, or we're looking at something like an analytics, like a report, and you're demonstrating what you've already done. I think that is just a completely different level of interview when we can point to something that you've done. And again, I go back to, you don't need to have amassed that experience on the last job. It could have been through school or through a course that you took as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Babatunde, I know you have quite a bit of international experience in marketing as well. And
Yes, I do.
I'm just wondering if you had any follow-up questions, or how do you feel about that sort of advice? Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, Adam is definitely right about the certifications, because most companies nowadays, they will, before you, aside you having a standard resume, yeah, they would request for the certifications in that niche. Take for instance, Google certifications. Like Google has a digital marketing, e-commerce and digital marketing certificates. Yeah, so they would request for that certificate to be sure that you are highly skilled and you've had, or you've done a project in that niche. Yeah, so Adam is right about that. Even while I was in Nigeria, I could remember the company I applied with. Despite the fact that I had my school certificate, they requested for the professional certificate, which was the Google certificate. So I suppose that was what actually gave me the job and also the interview. But they were actually pressing on the certificate, that they wanted to be sure that I took the certification, which I presented, and I got the job.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Adam Savio says, thank you so much for your inspiration today, and thank you so much for your answers.
Yeah,
We've got a couple more questions here. We have a question from Nivea. She says, good evening all. I'm Nivea, a wireless networking student. I'll be graduating next year, and I generally want to connect with people in my field to know what skills I need to focus on, as this is the right time for me to learn them. My question is, I want to connect with them, but I don't want them to have the impression that I'm connecting with them for referrals. So how can I start my conversation in this case? Do I need to set up my expectations here, and how can I proceed?
So Nivea, first off, congratulations in advance. It's a huge accomplishment to graduate next year. I'm sure you're excited. I'm excited for you. That's amazing. Secondly, I find what you probably should be doing, and what we should all be doing with our messages, if you're thinking about it in the context of, say, LinkedIn or email, which I think you probably are, is being transparent about what we want. For a lot of hiring managers, they are reluctant to open messages from people they don't know, because they're just thinking, gosh, is this person going to ask for a job when I don't even have a position open right now, right? Like, we don't want to disappoint you either. So by being transparent about the fact that you don't want that from someone, it's actually refreshing. It actually lets them know. What I would say, to go one step further for everybody here in terms of effective outreach, be crystal clear about what it is that you want. I'll give you an example of people on me. So I am very lucky that in this capacity, I get tens and tens of messages from folks all over the world every day, some wanting to come to Canada to work, some wanting to work specifically at my company, some wanting to just, follow a similar career path. And the ones that actually make it through are the ones that take the time to write a really good message. So they won't ask me for something, right? They won't impose on me, but instead they'll structure it, and it sounds something like this. They'll say, Adam, really intrigued by your career journey. If you could ever spare 15 minutes, I have 3 pointed questions about how you got to where you are today that I would love to have answered over a coffee chat, virtually or in person at your convenience. And you read that and you go, this person's, they only want my experience. They only want, sort of my advice, my recommendation. It's 15 minutes. They're not asking me for a job. Like, who can't give 15 minutes. So when it was structured that way, I was a lot more willing to meet with this person and answer what they wanted. And of course, when you meet for 15 minutes, there's a really good chance you talk for longer than 15 minutes, and then the conversation can go other places. But the whole point is you see how when you structure outreach that way, how the receiver, who's maybe receiving 10, if not 20 of the same type of message, looks at that and goes, okay, this is different. I can let my guard down a little bit. I'm not going to be hit up for a job immediately. So if you're doing outreach right now, my biggest thing for you, especially if you're not getting LinkedIn messages responded to, change the way you're doing outreach. Do not ask for something off the bat where there isn't a relationship to fall back on. Do not ask strangers for things. Instead, can you offer value? Can you offer value? As an example of a stranger who offered me value in a first meet, someone who reached out to me and said, love your website, found 3 huge errors on it. Do you want to take 10 minutes to go through it? And I was like, 3 huge errors. Okay, like what are those? And they were genuine errors. They didn't make it up. It wasn't some hook that they couldn't substantiate when we met, or I'd be upset, obviously, right? But this person offered me value in the form of their SEO help. It's something that I didn't really know about. So all of a sudden, we're making a connection because you have offered your help in outreach as opposed to asking something of someone who doesn't even know you.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. I'm seeing hearts coming up here. So I think that hit home,
Good.
that answer hit
Good.
home was very helpful. So I think that the theme is, students seem to be having difficulty in crafting their story during networking, whether that be outreach on LinkedIn, in an interview, or at an event. So we have another question for you from a student. How can I network and make good connections in my field that will help me grow and eventually potentially be a good reference in the future? On LinkedIn, it's really hard to do this. So I think you've already given some really good tips, really good information for students. Is there anything else you want to add or anything else that comes to mind on this topic?
Yeah, this is great. I mean, I think what a lot of people who are trying to break into an industry, you need to start by probably approaching some of the more junior or the newer people. I often think about it as an exercise you can do on LinkedIn where you look at someone who maybe has the job that you want or the job that you applied for and you didn't get. Can you see sort of what that person's qualifications are almost as a framing reference, right? Like my experience is here, the successful applicant is here. What do they have that I don't have? And if you think that it all is largely the same, could you potentially reach out and pick that person's brain about what they did in an interview? When you are congratulatory or complimentary of someone, you talk to them about how effectively they've managed their career. You evoke a different feeling in them. And I think for a lot of people, flattery is a strategic way to open a door or at least a conversation. So I would typically begin if I'm breaking into a brand new industry. I don't go for the CEOs. I don't go for the people who own companies. I start to work at people who are potentially in the role that I would break into, which is a little bit more junior. Those people may also have more time that they're willing to give you. And then I'm still trying to add that value, right? I'm still trying to be respectful of their time. I'm trying to ask for no more than, say, 15 minutes. I let them know I just have 2 questions. And even better, you can put those 2 questions in your outreach, right? You can let them know, I want to know a little bit about how you got to where you are today. And if you have any tips about X, Y, and Z, just be really, really prescriptive in your outreach. And I think you'll probably see a little bit better in terms of the returns.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah,
The questions are pouring in, Adam. Okay,
let's go.
so
Let's keep
got
them
another
coming.
one for you. So, in a situation where I'm needing to change fields, career fields, how can I build connections even though I don't have a lot of experience in the new field?
Yeah, so misconception is that, when you change fields, you leave everything from your past life and you start at the bottom again. Let's spend a lot of time articulating, doing some storytelling around the transferable skills. And I've seen people do this from like being in pharmaceuticals to being an accountant and using their love of numbers, their specificity, their level of accuracy needed in both jobs to make that successful transition, right? That is what you want to do with the storytelling aspect, but don't believe that you need to leave everything behind. Look at all of it and then maybe as an exercise next to a job description of what you're trying to get into and look for those commonalities. Look for the skills, maybe the soft skills, right, that are transferable. And then think about 1 to 2 anecdotes that you can use from your past life that'll illustrate or convey success in your future life. I think that would be my
Mhm.
biggest advice.
Mhm. And what would be one example of like a transferable skill that, sitting in your hiring manager seat, in your role right now, is there one transferable skill that comes to mind that works for someone trying to get into marketing or digital marketing in particular?
Absolutely. So when someone doesn't work in marketing, but they can demonstrate communication skills, like oral communication skills, I'm impressed already. And I've had a lot of English graduates who have worked at, say, a publishing house who have spun that and said, listen, at the end of the day, what you do is all about communication. What I always also did through the written word at a publishing house was all about communication. And
Mm,
I love when people do that because it shows not only do they understand what it's going to take to be successful in this new role, they are
mhm,
demonstrating that they have a steep background in that exact skill set. You are not ignoring everything that you've done because you're coming into a new industry or position. You are embracing that as a necessary step and actually, and for a lot of people, a differentiator. You're hiring a lot of marketing grads. Have you thought about hiring somebody with an English background? Because what I can do with the language is something that probably none of your other applicants can do. So it's really
mm,
amazing if you take some time to, again, work on those common questions you're getting every time. You can bridge gaps that way. You can turn weaknesses into strengths that way, but it takes a bit of planning.
Mhm.
mm.
I love that English grad as an example and the communication skills. Is there anyone that surprised you? Like, have you met someone in marketing and you were really surprised, like their background compared to sort of how effective they are in marketing, which is like, really effective. Are there any backgrounds or educational backgrounds that have been successful in marketing that you've seen maybe on your team or otherwise?
Yeah, so about 10 years ago, I wasn't at my current firm, but about 10 years ago, I was at another company. I was a hiring manager, and I interviewed a young woman. She was also international, and we had an okay interview. Like I would say that, she answered all of the questions, but she didn't do anything to set herself apart. There was no differentiator, and that's when the cat story came up. As we were leaving, and you typically as an interviewer, you always ask this. So again, interviewee, be prepared. Is there anything that we didn't cover today, or anything that you want to ask me? And she said, I'm not really sure if it's relevant, but my cat has 85,000 followers on Instagram. And I was like, your cat has, and she said, yeah, I built this, right? So it helps me to get brand partnerships with some of the major Canadian retailers so that we can get into their stores. And although there is modeling, really what I'm trying to do with this is make revenue. And here's how much he's earned. And all of a sudden I was like, if you had just brought this up earlier in the conversation and bridge the gap between your cat and you, because the cat doesn't have these skills, you have these skills, we would be having, so that person actually did move on to the next round of interviews, and they
Okay.
wouldn't have had it not been for that little anecdote that they weren't sure and they
Mhm.
certainly hadn't prepared. But once we started to talk about the cat and all the skills that they had to get the cat to where it was, all of a sudden I saw them in a completely different light.
So our pets could be our biggest secret weapon in moving through the interview.
You know,
I love it.
I'd love to say, so for each of my international students, I have to say my heart goes out to you, right? There's so much brilliance. I meet so many smart people who are looking for jobs that will be successful in what they get into. But this is the hurdle right now, right? So what I say a lot of this is an exercise in is it's an exercise in honing in and finding your offline brilliance, that thing that makes you you, that thing that differentiates you, and putting
Mhm,
that front and center in the interview. How can you
mm,
lean into your strengths and your skill sets? And how can you showcase that to an interviewer to set yourself apart, right? That even if it's a job where you think they might be hiring someone who has, right out of school, so zero experience, proficiency in English and French, they've got a typing background and they're proficient in all of Microsoft Office. Yes, but what else can you bring into that interview? Like the personality, the authenticity of the person in there is often the thing that sets you apart.
Mhm.
wow. So one more question, Adam. Still related to storytelling. So my question is, how do you ensure authenticity and transparency while storytelling in a corporate world?
Oh, it's a loaded one, Babatunde.
Yeah,
Sisha was talking about it. I work really hard at that, and that's why, the posts you see go up, I don't want anyone to ever think I just, I sat down at my keyboard and 4 minutes later I hit enter. It's not the case. It often begins with, what do I want to convey to my audience? How much
yeah.
am I willing to share? A lot of my stories are not just mine; they're with other people, and
Okay.
doing something as permanent as putting them in a book, you have to ask permission. You have to think about the words that you use to describe people. So activating authentically, there's going to be a line for each of us, and I make reference to that because that level of comfort, that level of privacy, it's going to be different for each and every one of us. But
Yeah.
to be authentic is to essentially, have values and have
Mhm.
actions and have those match. That's what authenticity means to me. So what I think about is I try to tell stories based on things that align with my actions, and those
Okay.
actions I hopefully align with my values. So that's what it means to me. For everybody, it's going to be something different. I've had some people say, "Nope, you're never going to get me talking about myself. You're never going to get me talking about my home country, my family, my kids. Just never. I only want to talk about business." That is okay too. If authentically you're a very private person
Mhm.
and the engagement that you want to have is just on what's in the public sphere, that's
Yeah.
okay too. For each of us, what it means and how we adapt this digital persona, it's going to mean something different entirely, and I have to respect that. So
Yeah.
I work really hard at it. That line of what's authentic and what's transparent for me, it's ever changing as I am as a human being. And ask me again next year, Babatunde, and it'll probably be something different.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, Babatunde, for your question.
Yeah.
I've got just a couple, maybe just time for one more question. I know we're almost at time. So maybe just for those maybe who missed Adam's answer earlier, it looks like we've got another question around confidence, but we've got a lot of thank yous coming in for all of your comments, and everyone seems to be very inspired, Adam. Just one final question here around, final thoughts around tips to overcome nervousness and lack of confidence during an interview or public speaking. So for any of you who missed this, Adam did share with us some tips already, but I'm just gonna maybe end on this note because this sounds like it's a really tough one for some of our students.
Yeah. So the first time I ever addressed a really big audience, it was at the Metro Toronto Convention Center. If anybody knows it, if anybody's Toronto based, big venue. And I found out that it was the first time I would ever speak to an audience of over 1,000 people. And in the
Oh.
days leading up to it, I was very scared. You use the word nervous, I'm going to use the word scared. And I sat down with my mentor to talk a little bit about the challenge ahead. And I kept going to those what if scenarios, and I'm sure a lot of people do, like, oh my gosh, what happens if like my legs just give out and I can't do it, if I just black out from fear. And he told me that confidence, the actual having of confidence and faking confidence, they present the same way. It's one of those few things in the world where if you fake being confident or you are actually confident, they invoke the same sort of feelings. So there's a lot of self-talk that people use. Rather than I'm nervous to, you say I am excited to. You'll notice that a lot of the tendencies, especially in the body, they're quite similar for anxiety as well as excitement. So you can use a trick like that. But for me, I just realized that whether I was actually confident or I was faking it, it always came across the same way. And if you missed the advice earlier, really was eye-opening for me. We're all walking these paths in life, and we're virtual right now. I'm sure a few of you are listening to me. Others are doing laundry, a couple of them on their phone. There's probably a baby screaming behind somebody. We're all walking our own different lives, and this is just a drop in the pot. It's a moment. So people are not thinking about us or critiquing us nearly as much as we are critiquing ourselves. So you might as well just go for it.
Well, thank you. I think we'll end on that note. Adam, thank you so much for, your great feedback and advice and for sharing this evening with us. Getting lots of hearts and claps and people are sending in their thank yous. I really appreciate it. And I'm hoping that you continue to do amazing work on LinkedIn. You're inspiring so many people. You may not have met them, but your stories are real, and we can see or feel your vulnerability, even though I know you've been practicing and reiterating that, but it's definitely landing amazing. Wishing you all the best in your future career. With your book as well. Just for those of you who are interested in this topic, Adam has his book out called Trigger Fingers. And it's personal branding through storytelling. There are 18 stories in here. I highly recommend you pick it up. If you are interested, reach out to me because I'm going to be doing a summer book reading club on Trigger Fingers for anyone who wants to build their confidence and to sort of reflect in a small group setting. Wanted to just remind everyone as well, in terms of next steps, we have regular weekly events every Wednesday. Our next event is a live immigration event on the 27th of March. We also have financial literacy. We'll be offering a savvy income tax tips for international students. And our next expert speaker series will be finance and accounting in April. And just in case you missed some of our other sessions, just wanted to let you know that on our YouTube page, we have over 45 career videos. So please feel free to, take a look at those and review them. And this video will also be up for you to review as well again. And just some personal career coaching services. Just wanted to encourage you to leverage your school career centers. You have alumni career services as well. For those of you who are graduating this year, reach out. And then finally, at Devant, we also offer one-on-one coaching. If you are one of the partner schools, you have access to all of our online tools for free through your school. And if you don't, we can also offer you additional coaching, and you can find all that information on our website. So thank you so much for joining us today. Contact us if you have any questions. Really appreciate your feedback if you'd fill out the evaluation form. And again, thank you guys so much for spending this evening with us. Hope you guys have a great day. And again, thank you so much.